we didn't have cover crops and the ground was a little bit hotter and we lost even more moisture, our highest readings were between 4 to 8 inches deep. So keeping that ground covered with a cover crop and also being able to get roots and nutrients deeper, we are seeing better nutrient removal and higher yields in this area. This is typically what our corn crop looks like. I don't know how tall it gets here in Minnesota. We average anywhere from 12 to 14 foot tall corn. It is a pain in the butt sometimes to pick whenever it gets that tall. But just an average of what we see. This right here had a 7-way cover crop mix and livestock integration. This over here is still no-till, but this is our county standard practices with either, chicken litter, a lot of synthetics. This is the same variety planted the same day. This one was just on our side where we had our soil health practices. This side did not have any. Which one would you rather have? This is 62, 64 pound test weight corn. This is running about 56, 58. Same variety. But we were able to sequester more carbon, more nutrients, more diversity and biology on this side and feed that corn plant. Yep. Question is, do we change maturities at all? When we first started farming, we were like 118, 120 day corn. We were about a 5.4 to a 6.2 bean. Now our corn ranges from about 108 to 116 day. Our beans, we went from determinate varieties, now we plant indeterminate, and we're running about a 4.2 to a 5.1. And shorten those up a little bit. That helps us with harvest and getting cover crops established, but it also actually matched up better with our rainfall. When we're typically getting those drier months in, June, July, we're trying to get pollination a little bit ahead of the heat, and then when we're grain filling, we're starting to see those rains come back in. So we've kind of tried to, on a normal year that works. This year just sucks, it's dry. Some of our corn, this was planted around 34, 35,000. This one right here is dry land. This one actually didn't get any of our drone shots last year. The person that was supposed to come fly for us never showed up. So that's why we have our own drone now. There's some of our ears. This was the year that we hit the 459, just some of the ears that we pulled out of the plot on that one. If you've never seen them before, that ear weighs 1.02 pounds. For us that year for 2022 in that farm, we were averaging anywhere from like 1.02 to 1.1 pounds per ear. Obviously, this is what the USDA saw, so this is why our grain market is tanking currently. Don't tell them about good corn, whatever you do. Once again, talking like we did with beans. How many of you farmers have ever heard about this potassium uptake curve? The first 10 years I farmed, I never heard about that. I always was told that we needed to worry about nutrition in the plant, essentially from R1 to the finish to get the biggest ear possible. But nobody really talks about, look at this, in potash, from V6 to V10, that's a 14-day period. It goes from 2.3% to 31% of the potassium needs of that plant. So that means in 14 days, your soils have to provide 29% of the potassium that plant needs to maximize yield. If your soils can't do that, then that is one of your yield limiting factors. Nobody talked about this in the first 10 years or 8 years that I farmed. But now we're mapping out meeting the potassium needs. We're also seeing nitrogen up curve. We're also seeing here's where our phosphorus is. And the bad thing about North Carolina is 90% of the farmers apply all their nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, and potash typically about March the 15th. And then it rains like 20 inches of rain in April and the 1st of May. Where did that sulfur and nitrogen go? Because our CECs are 5 to 9. It's gone.
You get hurricanes?
Yeah, we get a lot of hurricanes. Oh yeah. But my point being is, look right here. We typically don't see sulfur go up until we're getting to R1. So why was I putting sulfur on in April when I didn't need it until August? So this is where we've started broadcasting our AMS. So instead of putting AMS out here, we're putting AMS out typically about V14 to make sure that it gets time to flush into the ground and release. Now, if you're using ATS in a liquid and a wide drop, you need to be doing it sooner. ATS takes a little bit more time in the soil to convert and get that nitrogen available versus AMS. Same thing with beans. I know it's hard for y'all to understand or maybe see from parts of the room. Look how hard it is to make a corn plant happy. I mean, literally. That's like my girlfriend on a date night after too many drinks. You don't know which direction she's going to go.
Or personality.
Yeah, or personality, yeah. She's got at least 7 of them. The corn plant has 14, it's worse. But I mean, look at this, iron. How many of you were ever told that iron, what did we talk about? Who's the row crop guys? What did we talk about in the field today? Talked about the importance of iron. We're losing energy. We're losing chlorophyll, photosynthesis, stuff we learned about in the 3rd grade. Look at the iron uptake before V4. Why is that so important? What's the one thing that we don't want corn to stress for when it comes out of the ground? Sunlight. Well, if you're low on iron, guess what happens? That sunlight goes right through that plant and hits the ground instead of being absorbed as energy and put through photosynthesis. But this right here is what you have to manage if you want to completely 100% maximize yield. It ain't easy. And you've got to do this, once again, it's like beans. All right, so we're seeing an uptick right here of phosphorus. Well, does that mean we need to be if we need to have phosphorus available here? No, we need it available here. And then phosphorus dips back down. But look at that phosphorus curve right there. That's massive. And you've got to have it available down here. And if you run out here, you cut yield. If you run out here, you still cut yield. But this isn't as bad as this. Corn critical timings. This is what we focus on. V3, we make a foliar application. I take a tissues test, make a V3 foliar. I want that plant to be completely balanced by V4 so that we're determining ear girth and ear size. When you talk about rows around, we're seeing 18s, 20s, and 22s. Only one time have I ever found a 24 round ear. But if you're wanting more rounds, this is where you need to be focused. We make a wide drop pass at V4. Why do we do that? Look right here. What's happening at V4? Look at all of these nutrients. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 nutrients uptake at V4. So we're making sure with a foliar pass that we're balancing the plant and we're putting this in the soil so that it's available for that sharp uptake. Top dress, V6, V7. Like I said earlier, sulfur at tassel. Don't give up too early if you have moisture. If you're stopping your management on your corn at tassel time and that's your last management decision, you left bushels on the table. And I'm not saying you got to put fungicide out. I'm not saying you got to put a bunch of foliars out. But if you're not pulling tissue samples and correcting minor deficiencies at this time, you're leaving bushels out there.
What product do you use for sulfur at tassel?
Well, it's right before tassel. We're broadcasting AMS, about 100 pounds. We talked in the field. So this is the main vein of the corn leaf. And this is adequate iron. And you can see as we get further away from the vein, do you see how it's really nice and dark green on the secondary vein and it's translucent in the middle? That's iron. It's not necessarily deficient. It just doesn't have the right form and not enough iron to actually make that plant green. Same thing over here. So this one is from Iowa, this one's from Minnesota. Look at this one right here, same thing. We walked out into Grant's fields earlier today, same thing. Those plants that are growing and elongating on top of the plant, we saw plenty of this. Once that leaf stopped growing and had a collar, we started seeing it going back to dark green. It's because it didn't need as much in that leaf and it was able to stabilize it. But that plant isn't converting that iron fast enough from what we have in the soil to what the plant needs. I talked a little bit about our foliar reports. This is what a foliar report looks like. Typically in the past, you got this right here from a tissue test. And it had a ranking right here, and it said this is sufficient, this is sufficient, this one's a little low, this one's a little low, and these are low down here. And that's all it told you. And then it was your job to call the co-op and say, hey, I need some fertilizer, some foliar fertilizer, and they'd say, hey, apply 1 to 6 quarts. And you had no real management decision. We're giving management decisions now just like soil test, but we're doing it down to the ounce. So how many ounces do we need? Well, we need 7.41 ounces of nitrogen. That's pretty low. That's cheap. Calcium, need 14 ounces of a 10%, cheap. Sulfur, 17%, 22 ounces, not a lot of money. Now the zinc right here, they do have some zinc deficiency in the plant. Oh look, what did we just say this was? Iron? What's it showing right here? There's his iron. He needs almost a gallon of iron to correct the deficiency in that plant. Out of these nutrients right here, what do you think the most limiting yield factor is on that corn plant right now? Iron. What's a gallon cost again? 13 bucks. Now you can't apply 125 ounces of iron at one time. That's too hot. You can't put that much out. There are, like when you get your foliar report from us, it's gonna say like there are limits on some of these nutrients. Iron is one of them. Sulfur, nitrogen. You can make that load too hot. Boron, 36 ounces of boron, just right out of quart. Probably about $2, $3, depending on what your price is for a 10% boron up here. Molybdenum, 5 ounces. We know that that's important for nitrogen conversion. Then we talked a little bit about that in the cornfield. So corn plants are going to take up 70 to 80% of their nitrogen in the V stages in the nitrate form. They won't nitrate at that point in time. How many of you broadcast urea before planting? What form is urea? Huh? Yep. Where's our nitrogen at? How important is that early season nitrogen to have it when it needs it? That's why we use 32%, or like you saw on, 28, 32%. We're using something that has a nitrate form in it. It's a shame we can't get ammonium nitrate anymore. It was pretty good too. But if we're going to focus on the plant needing what it wants nitrate early in the season. And then when we were talking in the field, a lot of people had never heard before, a corn plant will actually take up nitrate nitrogen and convert it back to ammonium in the R stages. And so when we start talking about making foliar passes on our farm, we're liquefying urea. That's a good time for urea. We liquefy and we spray liquefied urea on our tissue, on our foliar passes after VT. How many of you have ever heard about a total nutrient digestion test? So this right here is a 0 to 6 sample. This right here is how much fertility is in your ground, not plant available, how much is there. Because I was always told, well, if you're using cover crops or if you cut back some on inputs, you're going to mine your soil. I have 2,988 pounds of nitrogen. I have 1,080 pounds of phosphorus. I have 6,120 pounds of potassium. How long is it going to take me to mine that ground? A lifetime, right? I think my great-grandkids could probably farm this if we could convert all of this to plant available. That's the problem. It takes biology, or it takes root exudates, or like we've talked about Band-Aids when we were out in the field where we're using those carboxylic acids, the calfa, or we're using citric acid to strip potassium off of clay particles. Let's look at the 6 to 12. Here's a 6 to 12. Still almost 2,000 pounds of nitrogen, 700 pounds of phosphorus, potassium 5580. Well, look, there's 61, 55. It's almost 12,000 pounds of potassium in the top acre foot. It's just not all plant available. It's bound. We have to figure out how to unbind that, and that's where we use biology, cover crops, crop rotation, and like I said before, like some of the carboxylic acids. If you've never seen a PLFA before, This is what a PLFA looks like. There's a bunch of stuff on here that I have no idea what it means. Essentially, what we look at, this is the very first one I ever pulled. On this farm, this is total biomass. So this gives us a read of total biomass. It's 4,324. We can see bacteria, protozoa, rhizobia. We can look at fungi. The big thing, if you're running the fungi to bacteria right here, if you get a 0.20, that is the same as a 1-to-1 on a PLFA, if you've never read one before. This is where we were at in 2022 on the same farm. Look at our total microbial biomass, 7,021. So we went from 4,300 to 7,021. That's almost double the microbial pool. That's breaking down nutrients, building soil aggregation, doing all the things that we needed to do. Y'all got any questions? Because I'm holding you up from beer.
So it's been 40 years since I was in college, and I cannot remember that science behind it. But, you know, we've been told over all these years that there's always potassium in the ground and all this stuff. How does the cover cropping help eliminate the availability of that potassium to the plant? Is it the breakdown of the biomass that does it, or microbial, or how does it make it more available?
Who in here has a problem with potassium? Anybody? All right. There was this really cool thing that Rick Haney did with a seed company. There's 232.5 pounds of potassium in this crop residue. This has been ran through biology and put into a plant form. When this potassium breaks down, it is immediately available to the corn crop.
When the biomass breaks down, it's available.
It's immediately available. It doesn't have to go through that microbial process again. It's already been changed.
Well, I've seen the change. I've been using cover crops since about 2010, and I've seen the changes in the availability of that potash, but I wasn't sure how it worked.
But even looking at the availability of it, when this potash gets released, that clay content doesn't bind this back up again. This goes into the free available pool. But then if you look right here, on the same soil, there's 121 part per million K right now reading on the Haney test. So you multiply that by 2, what's that? About 242, right? So there's more potassium. Well, I'm sorry, there's only 10 pounds less potassium in this above ground cover crop residue than what my complete soil test showed. So now instead of having 242 pounds in the Haney test that has to go through a microbial process, that has to release from clay content, that has to be able to take up into the plant after the microbes process it, I've got that plus this. It's a 1 + 1 = 5 is the way this math works out. Anything that you can put into this residue, like an amino acid form of nitrogen or an organic form of nitrogen that plant doesn't have to process on take-up, and these nutrients here that have already gone through that biological process, these are free nutrients. This is what helps fill those gaps. So when I talk about that steep potassium uptake curve, my soil can't supply enough. But between what my soil can apply and between what this put out there, we don't see that as a limiting factor anymore. And like what Rick did with the cover crop study, if you're short on potassium, the #1 cover crop was triticale. You got a potassium issue, plant some triticale. It's going to put a boatload of potassium out there available in that next season.
So on that, that it's not like nitrogen where that's found in carbon in it. So every year, right?
Flushes it out.
Right out. You ever taken hay bales, old hay bales, moved it, right? Or you had it sitting on a trailer, it rained, whatever, you had it, it's like oil and concrete underneath there. Have you ever seen that?
It's flushing the nutrients.
Plus the nutrients right out. Constant. So everybody wants to talk about key and making compost, bioreactors, all that. Clear up the compost, that's what you're doing right there.
Flushing.
Yep, and plus that's making carbonic acids and humic acids that help to make more potassium and helpful in that soil as well.
So that's when I first started farming, I was told we pulled a soil test, and that soil test was infinite and all-knowing. And whatever I pulled on, Monday, April the 1st, well, that was going to mean that it was going to be the exact same for the rest of the season. What I have found out in 12 years is I can pull a soil sample at lunchtime on April the 1st, and I can pull one at 5 p.m. on April the 1st. It's going to be two different results. And it should be that way. Like, that's what everybody argues. And they say, well, I pulled a Haney test, and we talked about it a little bit with your wheat. They say, I pulled a Haney test, and it said that I had 69 pounds of nitrogen, and it was going to release 15 pounds of it organically. Okay, well, you pulled this test on March the 1st, and it doesn't rain again until September. It's not going to be the same. You've got to have water, you've got to have biology, you've got to have temperature. You have to, it doesn't matter whether it's a Haney test or a conventional test. They're only as good as the snapshot of the day that you pulled them. And so that was kind of my aha moment when we had the drought of 2015. I didn't see any of that residue breaking down, and I called Rick Haney on the phone at the laboratory, and I said, Rick, my residue's still here. What do I need to do? Pull another Haney test. Pulled it, sent it to the lab. Guess what? Called for another 40 pounds of nitrogen. Did we apply it? No. We were in a D4 drought. It wouldn't matter if I'd applied that 40 pounds. It wouldn't have made any more yield, but it showed me that this right here and all these nutrients are a function of this. And if you don't have water, or if you're anaerobic, this doesn't matter either, because it's not going to function.
I want to mention that regular is going to have
It doesn't, no.
if it's dry.
Yeah, if it's dry, yeah, it doesn't matter what you're seeing on Olsen Bray or Millick anyways.
And on it, too, someone from the beginning, you ever tell oil without preservation of inlet, it used to provide of soil base. Right, so if you took that sample, soil sample, granted, again, how reliable is that? Phosphorus is only 85% accurate and reliable. Potassium, 60%. Your micronutrients in the teens.
That's probably on DTPA too. Yep. So, I guess what I'll leave you in one of my closing remarks would be, the thing that will make you the most money on your farm is you're the person in your fields and you're doing your own agronomy work. This makes me more money pulling these Haney tests, pulling these cover crop nutrient analysis, pulling the TDNs, filling up the sprayer. I've got on Myron a few times about what rate is right for Minnesota. Hey, spray a quarter of the field with this much and double the rate and then triple the rate on some 90-foot passes. And when you harvest it with the combine, if it's worth a darn and your combine's calibrated, you should be able to pick those additional bushels up or not and know, is it worth me spending an extra $2 an acre? Is it worth Myron spending that $4 an acre on that PGR? That's what makes you the most money in agriculture. And I'm not knocking on farmers, but it just seems like after World War II, when it seems fertilizer was cheap and easy, everybody gave up on their agronomy work and sent it off to somebody else. And I'm not saying an agronomist isn't a good person to have if you need them, but you should also be involved in these management decisions and not just basing it off of somebody else's opinion. So, any other questions?
So there's a bunch of stuff coming up about treating the crop residue, like in the fall, to try to get it to start decomposing faster. What's your thoughts on it?
We talked about that at your farm earlier. A couple of us did. I think in Minnesota, you're going to be hard pressed to harvest corn because from what I was told, it either has frozen or you're waiting for it to freeze so that you can finish. At that point in time, it's a moot point. If you want to try it, We've done it with in-soil, we've tried it with fish shit, we've tried it with organics, we've done a bunch of different biologicals and trying to just increase that bump up after harvest. I think for y'all up here, because you're seeing ground freeze either before or so close to harvest, you need to be doing it in the spring. Who, was it you? Yeah. I was telling him, get a drone and have somebody come spray 5 acres. You know, put a product on 5 acres, another product on another 5 acres, leave a check strip, do another 5 acres. And then you're gonna have to take, you know, and do some gram weights. Like that's what we're doing on our farm, and the companies that we're doing testing for is we measure 1 square foot by 1 square foot and actually get a gram weight of how much residue is out there. And then I'm measuring it at every 30 days. And I've got a Haney test in the beginning and a Haney test at the end to see how much residue reduction did we actually see, how many nutrients went in the profile. Because like at the end of the day, what David was talking about, you put phosphorus out there and you're getting 10% efficiency, you're doing pretty good. So that means we have to apply 10 pounds of phosphorus to see it tick up 1 pound on our test. If we're seeing the residue breakdown and we see 10 pounds of additional phosphorus out of that residue, that's worth 100 pounds of actual P in fertilizer. That's 220 pounds of DAP. So I mean, that's almost $100 an acre right now at our current prices at home. So if I spend $6, $12, $15 on a biological and save $100 on phosphorus, that's pretty easy ROI.